Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the April 4th, 2020 meeting of the City of Charlotte's Economic Development Committee. My name is Malcolm Graham. I represent UON's Charlotte City Council in District 2, and I also serve as chairman of the committee. It's a great day to be in Charlotte, beautiful day, and so I'd like to welcome all our guests who's with us here in the Government Center, as well as my colleagues who are with us virtually. And so we will start there and have them to introduce themselves, and then we'll pivot to those who are in the room, starting with the vice chairman.
Ed Drakes, committee member.
Good afternoon, Dimple Ajmera, committee member.
Greg Phipps, committee member.
Is there any staff on virtually? If not, we'll pivot to the guests and the staff in the room. I see one staffer.
Good afternoon, Emily Cantrell, Economic Development Department.
Welcome, Emily. And we'll introduce those who are in the room with us at the Government Center.
Robin Stewart, Economic Development Leader on Loan from Bank of America.
Holly Eskridge, Economic Development.
Todd DeLong, Economic Development.
Allison Craig, Interim Planning Director.
Christina Thigpen, Deputy Director, Economic Development.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Casey Grantham, CEO, Road to Hire.
Eric Lewis, Executive Director, Next CLT.
All right, so thanks everyone for being here. We welcome also the viewing public for tuning in and watching this exciting episode of the Economic Development Committee. And we have a full agenda in front of us. I know that Allison has to go to another meeting, so we're going to get right into the meeting where we left off a couple of weeks ago. Our director is not with us today, and so Christy and I will be manning the ship, and I think we're ready to go. So the first item is, Christy, any comments from you before we get started? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, thanks, Chair Graham. Let's just get started, and we'll pass it to Allison to set the stage for the UDO economic impact analysis.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having us here today. So I think as everyone is aware, we're doing a fairly robust analysis, an economic analysis of the draft UDO. The first UDO draft came out on October the 7th, and it's been under review for several months now. And we've asked two consultants to lead efforts in doing this economic analysis. And this is both from a financial feasibility as well as a site feasibility. And so I'm going to really turn this over to our two consultants to talk a little bit about what the scope of the work is and some sort of initial things that they've been reviewing and also some preliminary recommendations that they may have. So I will turn it over to David Green with Perkins & Will and Matt Prosser with EPS.
Matt, I think you're on mute.
I was. Thanks, David. Can you hear me now? Yeah, so it's good to be with you all. I'm Matt Prosser with EPS. I'm David Green with Perkins & Will be supporting me on this presentation. And we've been working pretty hard on developing our analysis to support the UDO. So we're going to walk you through an update of that. So next slide, please. So purpose of our economic analysis is to really evaluate the draft UDO and identify changes that are within the draft UDO that have significant financial impacts. So we've started with documenting those changes. We've been analyzing those through some pro forma analysis and then producing a report. And really the goals being to identify needed changes to the draft UDO, trying to create buy-in from the development community and then to help illustrate impacts to all. So we are wrapping up a economic study report that we'll be sharing with our stakeholders in the city soon, and then ultimately presenting that all to you. And there's a companion study that David is working on that is also in the works. Next slide. So just wanted to remind you of sort of the framework of how the comprehensive plan feeds into the policy map, which you all have just recently adopted, and then ultimately the UDO, and realize that the UDO is really the implementation tool for a lot of the policies and that are put forth in the comprehensive plan, and then reflected geographically within the policy map. And so there's a lot of changes, not only to sort of the approach that the city is using for regulating development, but also sort of the aim and aligning that with the community's vision. Next slide. And so we wanted to make sure our analysis kind of aligned with that policy plan and the policy map as well. And so what we've done is we've formed 5 focus groups that correspond roughly with sort of some of the major place types. So we have an employment focus group that's made up of a number of development community members, both developers and designers and the like, related to employment. So that's focusing more on sort of the manufacturing and logistics, campus and commercial place types. We have an activity centers group that is focused more on sort of mixed use development, higher density development. We have a neighborhoods group that's focused more on sort of single family and middle density housing. And then also a group that we've put together that's focused on adaptive reuse and redevelopment. That sort of touches on a number of different place types and contexts. And we also have developed a specific affordable housing stakeholder group that's looking at sort of the impact on affordable housing of the UDO, but more how can the UDO support the development of more housing that is affordable and attainable. And so that group has sort of an added mission or more refined focus than the other groups. Next slide. So our evaluation approach is really looking at in 2 different contexts. First, looking at prototype sites. So David's done a number of, go back one slide. David's done a number of studies related to sort of prototypical sites, and we have sort of modeled prototypical sites. But what we found is looking at specific projects and really specific projects that have been built in the community and comparing what the impacts would be for that project based on the current regulations and then within the draft UDO. And really a lot of our focus in terms of the impacts are related to those actual sites, but also illustrating just sort of the flexibility and potential of the UDO using the prototype sites. So next slide. And so really what we've been trying to balance is this idea of the balance between investment and return. Realizing that the UDO, the draft UDO, has a number of requirements that will affect the level of investment required for a project, specifically the private development community, but also from the city. And realizing that we're trying to achieve a number of these goals, and the UDO is one of those major implementation tools. So there is going to be investment needed to achieve those goals, whether it's open space or preserving trees or new street requirements or other aspects of the community's vision within the comprehensive plan. And we're balancing that against sort of the returns for the community, but also the private developer in terms of, what are the desired uses and building form we're trying to get, and what can be developed on a site, and really trying to understand that balance between investment and return is the lens that we're using. Making sure that we are getting investment in the things that the community wants to see, but also creating a development environment where returns are sufficient enough to balance the increased investments. Next slide. And so what we found in sort of desired outcomes is really we're trying to, like I said, balance those investments with increased returns. And ultimately, the draft UDO is designed to align new projects more closely with that community vision. But it's also designed in a way to make it easier, hopefully, to do development that the community wants to see. And so trying to reduce the need for rezonings and conditional zoning districts throughout the city. So we have a better process. So how can we make it easier for projects to be built? And then also realizing one of the biggest impacts of the regulatory UDO is the amount of development that can occur on a piece of land. If we can make more efficient use of our land, we will have less impacts on affordable housing and other things. And so the UDO is in many ways trying to balance all of those objectives and create an outcome and a development environment that can support that. And so some of the feedback that we had received from these working groups was that some of the new regulations are likely going to require increased investment. There's going to be increased costs for certain projects and for certain applications, just given that we're shifting the approach that the community is using for development. But what we also found is if we can more efficiently develop and intensely develop the land, we can better align returns with investment. And so what we're finding in David's work is that in a lot of cases, there's more flexibility and also greater potential yield for development within the different new zoning categories. And so that is extremely important and impactful in terms of the returns for the development community. But there are also some unintended barriers that we've been working through, a number of ones that we are addressing and sort of been categorizing in a few different ways in terms of changes that staff is already working on, potential changes where we need to have further discussion, and then changes that just the development community might want to see, but not something that the staff is willing and potentially council is not willing to make. And then ultimately, we've been getting a lot of requests about the clarity for the process of changing the place type map, but also the UDO and the zoning districts going forward, and really just wanting to have more clarity on that. And so we've been trying to provide that, but also providing recommendations to staff about how to address that sort of adaptability and growth going over time. We know that both the place type map and the UDO is not going to be perfect. And it needs to evolve over time, not only to address some of the unintended consequences, but also changes in development markets and the priorities of the community. And so realizing that there needs to be a process for adapting and modifying our standards over time, but realizing we need a new, really comprehensive base, new regulation to achieve the goals of the community. So next slide. So our next steps are, we really are in the depths of these steps already in terms of looking at site-specific impacts and looking at both the design challenges, but also the financial impacts of those, and then trying to relate that to more macro level findings. So what's the value of increased development potential on sites? What are the implications on housing costs and affordability from the UDO? And then what is ultimately our capacity for growth? And is it, are we creating more capacity and ability for the community to grow going forward through the zoning districts that are being proposed? And ultimately, we'll be sharing those findings with staff and the focus groups over the next couple of weeks. And then coming back to you all in a couple of different forums, both potentially this committee, but also a joint meeting with all the council members to share sort of our updates and get some feedback from you all before we finalize our analysis. And so I think that might be the last slide in the deck. And so there is some additional analysis that we've been working on and perhaps we can update, but for now I might just stop to see if we have any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Matt, for the presentation. Members of the committee, the floor is open for questions based on the presentation that you just heard. Any questions? Mr. Phipps, this floor is yours, sir. Greg, you're up.
Was it me first or Mr. Driggs? I thought his hand was up first.
He's right.
Okay, go ahead.
I will defer to the vice chair, and then Greg,
Okay.
you'll be second. Ed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when I look at this, one thing that goes through my mind is when we do macro modeling, we're talking about a lot of this stuff more or less in a vacuum. Like we're interpreting the costs associated with the requirements of the UDO, but at least theoretically, our analysis should take into account how the market will react, i.e. what economists call behavioral offset. So we could chart a certain course, and if the fact is that people want apartments or if people want single family homes or whatever, then our efforts to kind of steer development in a different direction are probably not going to work. So have we talked to the industry guys at all about how it's likely to play out when we put this overlay, this government overlay, on the housing and resident and commercial marketplace?
Yeah, we've been so we've been sharing our analysis models with them, as well as talking through site-specific changes or zone-specific changes. But one of the major sort of talking points, or I guess I don't know, that's the wrong term, I guess messages that they've been sharing with us is when we consider the impacts of the EDO, there's really two lenses that they're thinking about. There's one is yield, or the amount of development can then occur, and then there's also costs related to different new regulations. And then really sort of the message that they have is that if we were to place priority on those two things, there's a greater priority in making sure that you're able to achieve the yield that the market wants from a development site than it is perhaps some increased cost. And that's not true for all sort of increased costs. There are things that make projects infeasible, but ultimately it's more impactful if we are not able to accommodate the growth that's projected for the community through the development projects that we have in the type of products, to your point, Councilmember Driggs, that are desired by the market, than it is, say, to be more lenient on some of the cost impacts of the new regulation. And so that's sort of being the lens that we've been using as well, trying to illustrate what's the impact on the ultimate yield of development that we can get out of these projects in each of these zone districts. And then also documenting cost impacts, but realizing, and you'll see this in the financial modeling, that the impacts on yield, saying being able to do 5% less units is definitely more impactful on returns and the feasibility of a project than perhaps an increase of 3 to 5% of the development cost. And so what we're doing is translating that as best we can in a couple different measures at a macro level. So first, evaluating the impacts on capacity for growth, both jobs and households. We're also, realizing that economic analysis, the major inputs to that are the number of jobs and the amount of investment going into a community. And so trying to sort of weigh the impacts on, like I said, capacity for growth and the types of jobs that the community is likely and able to capture is something we'll fold back to you all in our findings. And then also trying to assess what the implications of the different regulations are on the specific price points for various products, and specifically housing products. And so what are the implications for certain policies that might be pushing a single family home and infill situation versus perhaps the duplex, and how that might impact the price points, but also the diversity of housing that we might see in the community. So they have been, and I mean, honestly, Councilmember Driggs, it's a challenging. Yes.
Let me just finish with the questioning. I appreciate your response, but you know that what we're talking about in the end is kind of a general equilibrium analysis. I mean, as an economist would look at it. So what's going to happen is certain costs will change, and then the developer and the builder community will look at those and say, okay, I'm going to need to earn my return on equity, and therefore this will be the price at which I can offer such and such a product. And then they line that up with the demand curves, if you will, everywhere, and that leads to a new outcome. So Are we going to end up with a large diversion of resources because, say, the economics of creating a food store change less than the economics of creating an apartment building or whatever? And so there could be all kinds of implications in terms of how the economy, Charlotte's economy, adjusts to this new environment, this new regulatory environment. And I know it's difficult, so I don't mean to suggest that we ought to get really academic and try to do a general equilibrium analysis, but I'm just pointing out to you that what you are doing is what I would call a cost-benefit analysis, a social cost-benefit analysis. And the developers are not going to bear these costs other than they may be adversely affected, for example, if our market becomes less competitive and they decide they can get better returns somewhere else, but it's not like they're going to settle for a lower yield on their equity. So we need to think of this in terms of what it implies for the end users. And those are the buyers of the homes and the tenants in the apartments and the small businesses and all those people. I think you had indicated to us once that it looked as if the burden on smaller sites was going to be bigger, especially because of open space and trees, where you end up with a relatively small portion of the site that's actually available. So are we increasing density on the developable land in those situations enough to offset the cost?
Yes, and that's what we've been exploring. And one of our initial findings is that, and one of the unintended consequences of some of the regulations, I think most specifically in the sort of neighborhoods group, is that some of the regulations in the draft UDO were sort of pushing the market towards less dense projects, if you will, or impacting smaller projects more specifically. Two things that come to mind are sidewall requirements for duplex units in neighborhood 1 context. And that's a change that we've been working with staff and the development community to make, and we'll see in the draft UDO, and that'll be illustrated in our analysis. Another was related to sort of access for duplexes and townhomes, and trying to not allow for every duplex or townhome to have a front access garage, and so you won't have several curb cuts on one street for multiple townhomes, and requiring the parking to be accessed via the rear of the property or the side of the property. And what we found in specifically that in sort of inner block sites, the requirements of providing access or parking in the rear has implications on the amount of units you could get in a townhome project. So a 5-unit project that is accessed via the front, multiple curb cuts on the front of the project, it could only do 4 units if we required on the rear. And so that has an implication on sort of the returns for that project, but also the capacity that we could develop. And so we've been working with staff and the stakeholders to identify where for those smaller projects, where their flexibility could be for some of the regulations, so that we're not having some of those unintended consequences on those smaller projects. Whereas a larger, say 20, 25 home townhome project is much easier for them to figure out access concerns than it would be on sort of a 4 or 5 unit project.
Okay, so Matt, you had pointed out to us before some analysis you did on the implication for neighborhoods and gentrification and things like that. And obviously that's a concern of ours. So this is more of a statement than a question, but I'm just saying one of the things that I hope we would get out of this is the implied pace of gentrification, or what the actual impact is on housing costs. And I think the last time you looked into that, you told us that there was no expectation that housing costs would actually go down as a result of the UDO because of the cost factors that you've just alluded to here. But I think as we do this, we need to stay focused on that priority of council that we not exacerbate the situation with housing costs and gentrification. And those aren't exactly the same thing, but both of those. So be good if that is sort of part of your interpretation of costs and benefits, frankly. It's a cost if the pace of gentrification accelerates in terms of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Anyway, I just offered that as a statement. I look forward to hearing more about your findings as you get further into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Councilmember Phipps?
Yeah, it was mentioned that, you know, invariably when we come up with the UDO, it's going to be some changes that result in increased investment and so on. But you specifically mentioned on one of the slides, you mentioned significant changes. Is there any kind of triggers that you're associating with significant? Is it a certain percentage or anything, or is that synonymous with just changes in general?
I think it's generally what we were referring to there are changes that would materially impact the ability to do the types of projects that were built previously. And so our analysis is really looking, like I said, looking at prototypical sites, but it's hard to get at that because honestly, the language and the zoning districts that are currently in the community are fairly different in terms of the approach that's in the draft UDO. So really where we've seen the most sort of fruitful analysis for identifying what those significant changes is looking at actual sites. And the work that David's been doing, and he's welcome to weigh in on their analysis, has been trying to evaluate how a project could be built, how a project that's been built in the community, say last year, how it would look and how impacted it would be under the draft UDO. And really a couple things that he's considering is just, are you able to do the project? And then what are the implications on the amount of development and how the site would be designed? And those are those findings are the ones that are most impactful, potentially from a financial perspective, but also from a regulatory environment. And so those significant changes, there's not an actual or a specific definition I could share with you. They're ones that are the ones that we've identified that are impediments to projects that have been built previously that we would hope to continue to see built in the future. And those are where we've been trying to document the sort of minor changes that may have small implications on site design or various things. We've documented those, but those are the ones that are not as important and are just going to be sort of a product of the way we're doing business. It's more those ones that impede the ability for the development community to build projects that's similar to the ones that they've been building currently. So I don't know, David, if you have more sort of specifics to the question.
No, I think you answered it fairly clearly. We were just doing detailed analyses and understanding the deltas. And I think your question, sir, about significant was broadly qualitative, and we were trying to look at really quantitative deltas for the community and for the development community to understand what these impacts were at a very specific level.
Oh, okay, appreciate that. My next question is, you mentioned these 4 areas here, employment, activity centers, neighborhoods, and adaptive reuse, but I thought in your presentation you said that there were 5. Are there only these 4 you're talking about as a focus?
So we have 4 groups that roughly align with some of the place types. So we have an employment-oriented one that's related to manufacturing, logistic, and commercial. There's an activity centers one that's focused on sort of mixed use or higher density development. There's a neighborhood one that's focused more on sort of single family and attached middle density product. And then we have that adaptive reuse. So that's the 4 categories. And then we also have a 5th one, which kind of overlaps on a lot of them, which is specific to affordable housing. And that group has not only market rate developers, but also some of our nonprofit or specific affordable housing focused developers within it. And their lens is one, to look at just sort of the general impacts on the affordability of housing, but two, really to look at what the impacts are on affordable specific projects. So projects that are either, a mixture of incomes or all income restricted units. And how can the UDO have more flexibility in it to allow those projects to occur and compete with sort of the private market rate environment? And so that would be the fifth group, and like it overlaps in a couple different instances with a variety of different product types. So that's why we sort of showed that overlay, that groups kind of touches a number of the place types, not just one specific place type.
Good, I understand that one. My final question for right now is, will this analysis include the cost of maintaining the status quo? I mean, it's been it's already been mentioned about, how these changes might undermine the cost and investment and what we could do currently, as opposed to what these particular changes would do on a project going forward. But what if we maintained the status quo and did nothing? I mean, isn't that a cost there, given what we're trying to do with both the comp plan and our mapping exercise, and finally the UDO?
Yes. So, I mean, back to Councilmember Driggs's report. I mean, in essence, this is a cost benefit analysis, and looking at our comparison of the current regulation projects that were built under the current regulations versus the draft UDO will help us illustrate both qualitative and quantitative costs and benefits. And so we can illustrate, what the regulation is producing in terms of increased benefits to the project and the community, in terms of whether it's open space or preservation of trees or better mobility solutions, and then balancing that with the cost to the project specifically, and ultimately what that result in terms of an increased cost or impact on the community or future renters or buyers of those products. So yes, I think that's an important consideration of this is, what if we don't change, and how will that implicate how we go forward in the community?
Thank you very much.
Okay. No other questions?
Mr. Graham, my hand is up.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of questions. First question, to follow up on Mr. Phipps, how do you measure, or how do you assign a value to community benefits like housing, access, or open space? I'm just trying to, I'm interested in understanding how would you account for that in your model?
Yeah, honestly, in most cases, it's done qualitatively. There have been studies that would say, hey, looking at the impact of green space or trees on communities, but that's even more robust and sort of an in-depth analysis that would need to be done. And what we're trying to do is to identify both those quantitative and qualitative impacts and benefits on the community, and help try to illustrate where benefits are being generated and where increased costs or investments are needed. And so specifically to your point, some of those things like open space, like trees, like are more going to be qualitative benefits. We are able to document some of the quantitative costs or implications of building those certain requirements or including those certain requirements, but it's challenging, especially in sort of our scope and the purview of the study, to really comprehensively compare what the monetary value to the community of some of these community-wide benefits would be to, and then comparing it to a specific project. And so unfortunately, there isn't going to be sort of at the end of the day a net number of this is the benefits monetized to this is the cost monetized. It's going to to illustrate the benefits that we see and compare those to some of those cost implications for the community.
Got it. So I think when we do get results from this matrix, I think we have to keep in mind that some of these benefits are not really being, there is no quantifiable value that we can put in. I know there are models I have seen that puts a specific value that, you know, here is the value for open space or for mitigating the stormwater, for an example, or housing. So I think it makes it really difficult when we are making a decision just off of numbers, where we got to consider the community benefits. Also, I know that you touched on this, Matt, earlier about increased flexibility for infill development versus larger development, right? And also higher density. I would be interested in understanding how some of this flexibility and higher density offset some of the requirements around access or tree save preservation, and really at the end of the day, just the impact on construction, right? Because we are trying to increase the supply here of our housing. So I would be interested in seeing overall impact on the supply. And last question I have, Matt, is, well, actually this question is for the staff or Mr. Chairman. It's a process question. So are you looking, I understand that this will be presented to the TAP committee, but are we going in front of the full council to see if there are additional refinements to the criteria or to the measures before the findings are being worked on or presented?
So yes, Councilwoman Najmira, we will be back before full council. We're still trying to figure out exactly when that will be, and it will certainly be an iterative process as we get results from the consultants and we start to make changes to the UDO. I'm sure there'll be further refinements that we'll need to make to the analysis itself. And so between now and UDO adoption, I'm sure we'll be in front of full council at least once, if not more than that.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Matt, thank you for the presentation. Allison, thank you for being here as well. While I got you here, I know the council voted last week to move forward the mapping process, but there were 4 council members voted in the minority in reference to making sure that we don't leave anybody behind. So are you guys addressing that to ensure that we don't kind of leave neighborhood leaders who believe that they needed more time to understand? And so I'm sensitive to that. And so can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I mean, planning will continue, and the next phase of the policy map work is really related to community area planning, and there will be robust engagement over, and probably take a couple of years to get through all the different areas. And we will be looking to all different ways in which we can engage the community, and certainly invite council to let the community know when we're working in their particular area. But as soon as we know what the community area plan schedule is and sort of which plans will come first, we'll certainly come before council and with those recommendations so that we can make sure we're getting the word out. So yes, we do not want to leave anyone behind. There's a lot of additional work to be done, and look forward to having those conversations with the community.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, and we'll be back in front of the committee later when we have preliminary findings. So thanks for having us today.
All right, thank you for your presentation. Thanks, Matt. The second item on our agenda is the Hire Charlotte Employment Framework with implementation recommendations. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Thigpen.
Thanks, Chair Graham. So next slide, please. I just wanted to kick off with just reminding everybody of the goal of Hire Charlotte, which is to immediately increase our employment ecosystem's impact on creating and filling jobs that drive economic prosperity for all. And so today we're going to walk through the framework and recommendations that really give us the pathway to get to our desired future state, our North Star for employment ecosystem. And simultaneously, it's important to keep in mind this is such a crucial time because it will also be informing and helping directing collective investments of the ecosystem in ARPA decision-making. So we'll be making some recommendations for implementation on how funding can be used, whether it's public or private. Next slide, please. I also wanted to give a quick update since the last time we presented at committee in February. Since we presented our key insights to you, we've finalized our framework, which we'll go over today, and really appreciate the guidance and support of our steering committee and project management team. Casey, I want to thank you for being a part of that. We've got great feedback from our steering committee, and just as a reminder for the organizations that have been part of the process, you'll see here there's a wide variety of representatives from our entire employment ecosystem, so we really feel good about getting some great input to drive this initiative forward. Next slide, please. And then this is just a visual we've used throughout the process of Hire Charlotte that really illustrates the power of the employment ecosystem, connecting job seekers to employers with the North Star in the middle and all of the players that get us to where we want to collaborate within the employment ecosystem. And, at the end of the day, it's all about connecting job seekers and employers, and look forward to presenting the implementation recommendations to you in the coming slides. Next slide, please. Over the past 9 months, we've worked with our consultant SIR to map out where we are today, where there are gaps in the system, where we're headed if we continue with the status quo, and then what would happen with more intentionality? What could be possible? And we looked at some external factors that would help shape the direction. And I did want to make you aware that each of these steps has a deliverable, and all of this material, I think Emily counted 500 slides of incredible content, is all available on our project website, hirecltmec.com. So it's been a lot of great work to get us where we are today in identifying values and our vision. Next slide, please. Next slide again. So our vision, Charlotte's employment ecosystem, is a collaborative, agile, and results-oriented network that accelerates employer growth and upward mobility for all. And our values are based on the foundation of that vision. So how do we get to that vision? We identified several strategic goals and then came up with 6 implementation recommendations. And I'm going to spend a good bit of time on this slide to really walk you through the implementation programs. And I'll start with our one-stop portal. Currently, there are multiple access points across the workforce employment ecosystem organizations, making it difficult for job seekers and employers to know where to go or how to most efficiently engage with available resources and services. And what's great is there's already some momentum in this space, so we're aligning with CLC's current pathway initiative, and Mecklenburg County also has a strategic priority in this area. And so we kind of see this one-stop portal being done through phases. So phase 1 would be connecting job seekers to resources. Phase 2 would be connecting job seekers to job opportunities. And then phase 3 would be connecting to wraparound services. And KPIs could include number of ecosystem members that participate, site engagement, number of jobs successfully employed, barriers removed. What's exciting is the City of Charlotte's already involved in a pilot program with CELC and Charlotte Works, and we're going to be using that core committee to expand this one-stop portal. We've gotten some great feedback in addition from the steering committee, the city leadership team, and so we're going to expand that committee to also include the county and UNC Charlotte to make sure we're going in the right direction with this one-stop portal, which you'll continue to hear more about. The next implementation program that I'll touch on is soft skills, universal certification, and training and development. So When we did our survey, employees universally shared an ongoing need for candidates with soft skills, and this need is growing as we think about disintermediation of certain jobs. And so when we talk about soft skills or essential skills, we're talking about communication, teamwork, adaptability, problem solving. And so as part of this implementation program, we're looking at two interrelated programs, so the certification, the universal credentialing of soft skills, and then consistent training and development, a program that's informed by employers' soft skill needs. And so we still need to identify the lead organization that would help us with the implementation program, but definitely part of the process will be inventorying existing programs such as the county's Working Smart and seeing what works and seeing how we can build on that. And then, as part of the funding with this, we see incentivizing training and development partners to retool their training programs and funding for participant stipends, as well as some wraparound services, which we'll talk more about later. The KPIs for soft skills could be the number of job seekers certified, job seeker satisfaction, and employer satisfaction. The third implementation recommendation that came out of our work was hard skills universal certification and training and development. And, with the ongoing labor shortage and difficulty in finding skilled labor needed, this is more important than ever. And so coming up with specific plans for each industry to deliver candidates with the hard skills needed. We would also anticipate leveraging advisory councils at UNC Charlotte, Johnson C. Smith, and CPCC. And so we would look at our target industries and start from there and identify 3 core hard skills from each. So for example, if we were looking to do it for fintech, what are those 3 to 5 skills that employees need to advance in that field, and what would it take to get there? And so for funding, like with soft skills, we see incentivizing our training and development partners and retooling programs and funding, and definitely incorporating participant stipends and wraparound services in this implementation recommendation as well. KPIs for this recommendation could include percentage of demand filled by cluster type, the number of job seekers employed, employers engaged, and a percentage of employer satisfaction. And then as we kind of look to the next step, we think about scalable reskilling upward mobility programs, and we see this as more employer-based. There's an urgent need to develop and roll out reskilling and upskilling that's scalable across companies and industries. And so essentially, this is a training program for the jobs of tomorrow. And this would build on our soft and hard skills training work. And so for funding for this, we see developing an innovative internal reskilling model that could give substantial subsidized training stipends per person. So training X number of existing employees, making under a certain amount, and giving them a certain stipend to advance them and help them reskill so that we can have more job opportunities for existing residents in these companies. And KPIs could include the number of employers who participate, the number of workers enrolled, the number who graduate, a percentage change in income, and post-program success. Our fifth implementation recommendation is target industry recruitment talent development action plans. So as we all know, retention and business growth are essential for Charlotte's future, and we need to support Charlotte's growth in an intentional way. And so we've identified target industries for Charlotte and have plans to support recruitment of each cluster. So the target industries include finance, technology, business management and administration, transportation and warehousing, manufacturing, and health sciences. So we recognize that work plans need to be established independently with strategy for growth first and training second. And then, example of this is Atrium's Innovation Campus. There needs to be alignment with education to jobs that this campus will bring. And our economic development partners will need to stay in close contact for this to coordinate with existing employers and workforce development partners. And so KPIs for this recommendation could include lead generation, jobs generated, employee type, and location. And so, you know, we definitely see ourselves working with the Alliance and the county, brokers, MSDs, to really drive this forward. And then in the center of it all is our 6th implementation recommendation, which is the Ecosystem Network Coordination and Growth Plan. And so even before our work started, there was so much integrated energy and efforts going into workforce development initiatives. And so the desire for greater coordination and momentum around the Strategic Employment Framework Initiative just continues to grow, and we want to make sure that we're maintaining that momentum. But we really need ongoing coordination and accountability to make that happen. So the recommendation here is to create a standing coalition, essentially Hire 2.0, perhaps hiring a director to lead this forward. And so we still need to identify who will lead this and who the partners will be involved in this. But KPIs for this initiative could include, you know, the number of training and development partners involved, our employer partners, and just, you know, over the next couple of years, our ecosystem performance rating scores, and taking that C that we identified from our survey results and hopefully turning that into a B eventually, even getting stronger. And so I know this is a big plan, and we recognize that the work is just getting started, but we definitely see the city really being involved in the coming months to keep driving the implementation as we identify our partners for these different implementation programs. Next slide, please. And so just wanted to kind of share some of the tenets that we based our implementation program requirements on. And we wanted to make sure we could really, all of our stakeholders could see themselves in the work, that they felt that they could be a part of these implementation programs, as well as just making sure that they're sustainable and scalable, and that there's accountability. That's why I kind of touched on some of the KPIs through each of the implementation programs, and that, of course, they all could make a significant impact on our employment ecosystem. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a snapshot of our programs, and you know, when we start to think about public and private funding, I think it's important to acknowledge that wraparound services go across all the 6 programs in addressing various barriers and needs. So we recommend that a significant portion of our budget goes to this, whether it's public or private funding. And so, you know, we have some estimates for each of these initiatives, but this kind of maps out some percentages and how we would go about proposing what the budget could look like to fund these implementation recommendations as we move forward. Next slide, please. Next slide. And so our next steps now, after presenting to you, is just reconnecting with the steering committee. We've already gotten some great feedback as to some steering committees who want to stay involved, and we have a meeting coming up with the county, Charlotte Works and Goodwill, to talk about Hire Charlotte and what implementation programs these groups want to own and how we can continue to collaborate with them. We obviously have to identify funding opportunities and potential allocations from our different partners. And then, you know, I think it will be important, of course, to identify a lead organization for our ecosystem network coordination and growth plan. And in terms of a lead organization to start the implementation process, as I mentioned earlier, the city will definitely be heavily involved over the next several months, because we really want to make sure that these implementation recommendations get off to a strong start and our partners stay involved and that there's collaboration across the ecosystem. And so we recognize we need to take a leading role in the coming months as we identify the leading partner organizations for each implementation recommendation. Next slide. And then this is just an overview again of our implementation recommendations, the 6 programs that we came up with the steering committee and the project management team. And I know I went through that at a high level, but wanted to stop now to see if anybody had any questions.
Thank you. A lot of information for sure. And let's see if we can unpack some of it with some questions. I'll start last. I'll open it up to my colleagues. Virtually, Councilmember Ashmere has signed off, so it's just the three guys.
And Ms. Wellington.
She's there?
She's on.
Welcome.
Mr. Driggs and Mr.
Thank
Phipps have-
you. Oh, I was over here pressing space. I apologize. I wasn't coming off the mute, but thank you.
Okay, so let's start with Ed. We'll give you first crack at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you talk about the funding, do you imagine that most of the cost of this is going to be borne by organizations? Or I think, see, you've got it down as public-private, but are we talking about giving grants to people who are in these respective spaces? Or how exactly would those funds be dispersed?
That's a great question. I would say we're still figuring that out. I think there could be some grants dispersed as part of it. I also envision the second phase of ARPA funding, we would put a fair amount of funding toward these implementation programs. We'd still need to work out what the structure looks like, but
I thought you said we weren't using the ARPA funding, did I?
no, I said it could be a part of it, but there could be private funding as well, because there are so many related initiatives going on at this time, and we're hoping Hire Charlotte can really be the umbrella of all those initiatives. So we're still working that out, but grants could be a part of it, but we really want to use some of the public funding, hopefully with the second phase of ARPA, to drive these initiatives forward.
So how many city staff people would there be? I think you mentioned a director. Would that be a city employee?
I definitely see a city employee helping manage the initiative. I think because of the nature of Hire Charlotte, the recommendation is to have an independent director helping carry this through. That would obviously go through an extensive RFP process.
Right, because this is incredibly large scale and ambitious. It takes a lot to make all this stuff happen. I mean, we went through that fund years ago, $500,000 we put into trying to have high growth companies, promote high growth companies in Charlotte. So if we really want to see results from this, it's going to take a big push from us. And that means that whatever the ARPA fund allocation is, I mean, personally, I wonder whether we ever thought about creating an actual kind of city employment office, or on the other hand, Goodwill kind of has that. But this isn't a website, right? This is,
No,
how does this actually manifest itself in terms of, say, the prospective employee? How do they interface with all of these initiatives?
Right. So the one-stop portal, there is definitely a component that would be an extensive site, a one-stop shop for people to go to, but we also see some in-person pop-ups that would help go to meet the job seekers where they are. So that hasn't been fleshed out yet, but there's an in-person component working with all of our partner organizations to implement these recommendations. But then you would have this robust website as well as a complement where people could go. And, that would also, we envision that site also being the place where, for soft skills, resource training, hard skills, employers would go there as well. But obviously, it would be a lot more than a website, but we would envision this robust site as the home base for Hire Charlotte 2.0. So job seekers and employers would know where to go for all the resources available.
A lot of would-be employees complain that their resumes end up in waste paper baskets. And you can Google now and see, all kinds of employment-related websites and services and stuff. So I guess my concern here is the tangible kind of value-added and coordination. Are we planning to talk to CMS and CPCC as part of this project?
Yes, and we're also looking into existing platforms too, to see if there's a way to build off that, whether, I don't know what LinkedIn has planned, but, we want to work smarter on this, and we know that there are a lot of systems that exist, so that's all on the table, but definitely talking to all of our partners for this initiative.
So I think this is a good kind of overview of the problem and the needs. At some point, as we go forward, I'll be looking to see what intangible terms we are able to do here. I think employers, for example, that offer training programs with a commitment of employment to follow is a tangible step. I've been pushing pretty hard for apprenticeship type programs. And the other thing is just outreach and recruitment so that the schools and other organizations need to actively recruit and encourage people who are discouraged right now or who see barriers because of their skills. They're not necessarily going to kind of present themselves. We're going to have to go out and find them and tell them, yes, you can do it, and this is how we can help you do it. So I like where we are so far, but I would like the city to make a big investment here, because I think that this is frankly an area where we're underinvested in relation to the money that we put into affordable housing. As I've said before, if we can help people to reach a level where they can afford to pay for their housing rather than trying to bring the housing costs down to them, that's a better outcome for the individual. And so, you know, if we do this on a large scale, I think that's a worthwhile investment. But thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Greg?
Do we know right now where the one-stop portal would be housed?
We're just beginning that work with, we're doing a pilot with a company called Radius, who earned a Bloomberg grant to explore that. So we're just starting the process. We're not exactly sure where it will eventually be housed, but we wanted to start with a couple of employers and start small to kind of assess what our needs are and then go from there.
Thank you.
I tend to agree with Ed on a number of points. One is I think it's a really good draft outline. The devil's in the details, and there's a lot of details that I probably need to read over the presentation tonight and kind of formulate some specific questions in reference to it. I think the city investment is necessary. Recurring investment, ARCO funds is going to be going away at some point, so I think it should be a recurring investment that the city invests in, that we do this. I think Ed is right. I mean, you can't get an affordable house, you can't get health insurance, you can't send your kids to school if you don't have a job, right? And so it all starts there, and I think we need to be very intentional in reference to how we do that. My only point, and I understand about the portal, I understand that this is 2022, but, you know, I remember when I graduated, I had 50 resumes in hand, and I went knocking on doors, and people were able to see me, feel me, touch me, and even I talked my way into jobs. And so if there's a way for us to personalize this in some respects, their approach in terms of training programs leading to jobs is one way, but if there's a way for us to really have some type of communications with the corporate community and those workforce development programs where getting people in front of people, I think is important. And also, I saw all the other partners listed below, but we got to find a way to get in communities, churches. I even talked to Mark Jarrell, a friend of mine, the County Commission, about, you know, we need 21st century rec centers. I mean, yeah, you can go there and play football, baseball, basketball, but you should be able to go there and get some job training and SAT preparation and financial literacy skills there in neighborhoods, in communities. And so if there's a way for us to really kind of dumb this down a little bit and make it a little bit more user-friendly versus the portals here, I get it, I understand it. Lincoln wasn't available when I graduated. A lot of things weren't available. But now they are, so I get the efficiency of that. But it's just the handshake, the eyeballing, and it should be a little bit more than just a pop-up. It has to be ingrained in the fabric of what we're doing, because as the community grows, it's not going to get any cheaper. And so the way to combat that is really bringing the jobs, matching the jobs where the people are, and especially with the grassroots community, we have to be in neighborhoods, in communities, touching folks in the way that some of our partners are currently doing. So another question, just kind of overview in terms of as you guys move forward with it, just some food for thought.
Thank you, Chair Graham. I appreciate that.
Ms. Wallington, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Can you see me? Okay. Actually, I rose my hand, but several of you all have already said some things I was thinking. I think we do a great job in ED talking about strategy and wanting to take a good look at the big picture, but as several of you have already said, I think the opportunity is let's get to work and let's just get some gains, right? Done is better than perfect. So my question is, at this point, what is it going to take, or what do you all need to get into the community, and so that 6 months from now, we're looking at people who have been able to get through the system and get hired, rather than still kind of in the starting blocks trying to wrap our heads around it. Does that make sense? What is it that's keeping us from getting a little closer to execution?
Well, now's the time to start. I think now is the time to really get into the community. And I think, too, it's important to reiterate that we really see Hire Charlotte as working closely with our Corridors of Opportunity Initiative and also coordinating some of those EY workforce study recommendations. So really getting into our communities with our different partners. I mean, this is the easy part. We have our implementation recommendations, and now we have to work with our team to work with our community partners to start implementing these initiatives. So we have a lot of work to do, but the time is now for us to collaborate with our community partners and get these initiatives moving.
So what is it that you need? Because last month we talked about corridors, and it looked like there was maybe a gap of 6 or 7 people.
Yeah, so people will be helpful as we work on those initiatives. And I think it's really meeting with some of our workforce development partners and kind of needing that commitment from our partner organizations to drive this forward, in addition to funding to help us get
And I
this
don't want
work
to steal
started.
the Councilwoman's thunder, but I interpret that as well as Ed, is that we're in the budget season. We don't want to be talking about this strategy 6 months from now. So what do you want?
Yeah, so, yeah.
And so we can make sure that over the next 60 days, we're able to accomplish that. And so that in August, we're talking about a resource center on Baysford Road where folks can walk in and apply for a job or get referred to resources or a number of other initiatives. I think these corridors present a unique opportunity for us to get really grassroots in the community where someone can walk into a door versus click into a portal, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Absolutely. I hear you.
I'm
there.
sorry, Victoria.
No, you are in lockstep with what I'm saying. What is it that do we need?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, that's kind of my point too. I think that there should be a place and there should be people. A lot of job seekers who are frustrated, if there was somebody that would see them, could either refer them and get them in-person interviews or take the steps that are necessary to make them ready for in-person interviews. But there is a barrier there that I think we can address, but it's going to take people to do it.
Yeah, And that equates to money.
Yes.
And it goes back to the councilwoman question, like, okay, tell us what you want. And
So, yeah, we're hoping to finalize our ask over the next couple weeks, so.
weeks, we're, gotta be quicker than that.
Okay.
I see Victoria, so I don't want to rush, but at the same point,
Yeah.
I think there is a sense of urgency in the community. We approve our budget probably in June. This is mid-April for all practical purpose. And so it's just, and I'll talk to Tracy and say, okay, this, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? We just need a vehicle that we can continue to add stuff to.
Well, I appreciate everybody's support. And
Okay.
we'll keep the conversation going and communicate those needs sooner than later, so thank you.
All right. All right, we'll pivot to our last agenda item, which it's our partner program, and I'll turn it right back to you again.
Thanks, Chair Graham. So we're excited to have a couple of our partners with us today to give some progress updates, and I'd like to turn it over to Emily Cantrell to introduce our first guest. Oh, actually, I'm going to turn over to Holly to introduce our first guest.
Thank you very much. I love a good pivot. Hey, I'm Holly Eskridge. I work in economic development, and I'm here to introduce Eric Lewis. I've worked with Eric Lewis. He's the executive director now of Next CLT, but I've worked with you for 7-8 years, something like that, in this fabulous world of our small business ecosystem and supporting our small businesses, especially those that are underrepresented founders. So we're really excited about this program and this partnership we have with Next CLT. So Eric, I will turn it over to you.
Hi. Hey, thank you, everyone. Really excited about being here. When you think about Next CLT and you think about the city of Charlotte and you think about entrepreneurs, we're actually looking at creating the next level of entrepreneurs and businesses owned by Black, Indigenous people of color. As you know, entrepreneurs around the world and around the country, but in Charlotte, have a difficult time starting. However, entrepreneurs of colors even face more greater challenges, even when they have access to capital or they have high, scores from the vantage point of their FICO scores, they still can't get access to capital. And so Next CLT, along with the City of Charlotte and other businesses, have pulled together to create an opportunity to build and enhance the skills of entrepreneurs, but then help them to scale and grow. And so next slide. Our mission, as I mentioned, is to create the next generation of entrepreneurs owned by Black, Indigenous people of color. We aim to create a great pathway for those entrepreneurs. We are forging real accessibility. And when we talk about accessibility, we talk about getting them not only social capital, but economic capital and true enterprise opportunities. True enterprise opportunities. Next slide. So how do we do that, and who are we? So when we look at Next CLT, we actually create leadership development. Some people may think of management, but we create leaders. We have, as we build into our immersive learning, we bring entrepreneurs in cohorts and groups of 8 companies at a time. And the reason why we bring them in groups of 8 is 6 to 8 is the sweet spot of giving them true care and real uplift and guidance so that they can actually change their mindsets. It's about a mindset change. So leadership education, helping them embrace innovative shifts and leader shifts in how they think. So one of our key initiatives when we actually kick off immersive learning is to get them to get a mind movie of how they would be if they were the CEO of a larger company and teach them how to think like a leader. We shift that into access to capital and access to social capital. And that happens from the vantage point of creating relationship and mentorship. So a lot of business owners sit by themselves without interacting with each other. And so our role is to make sure that they interact, they get help from business owners who have already scaled, and also corporate partners who are in senior leadership positions in their organizations to help teach them and guide them, ask the right questions, kind of like the questions you are asking as we go along this path. Access to markets. So when you look at supply diversity and other types of opportunities, we are actually creating opportunities by really sitting down with enterprise organizations and bringing them to the table, much like you were saying, Chairman Graham, of bringing real-life relationships one-on-one so that people can have contact versus going into a portal just sitting there. Now, portals are good, don't get me wrong. We need both. And everything we need now is to kind of like channel both paths. Next slide, please. So who do we serve? We serve Black, Indigenous people of color. We hyper-focus on the Black because our society has actually kind of like, in our current society, has actually kind of like created different challenges and barriers for people of color to get access. However, we don't leave anybody out in that space. So 51% of ownership must be of a person of color. We actually focus on the sweet spot of $250,000 in revenue. And the reason why we do that is because part of our partnership with organizations like the City of Charlotte and other organizations like Aspire, etc., the Amped Up program focuses on one region. BoostPad focuses on another. The reason why I mention these organizations within Next CLT's presentation is because it's a full ecosystem. Exactly what you were talking about in the hiring process. So we can't compete, we have to help complete the opportunities for all entrepreneurs in the city to grow, scale, and become, help create jobs and wealth legacies. Being in business for 3 years, companies in our cohorts have to be in business for 3 years. And they have to be headquartered in Charlotte. And when we look at it as our higher purpose is to make sure that we create legacy ownership. Legacy ownership means that wealth can go through generationally, and that organization, that company are growing businesses that 20 years from now is still alive, but they also have jobs for people in the next set of jobs that are coming. Next slide, please. So when you think of it, why are we here? I mentioned the fact that unapologetically we tackle structured inequality, and so we change narrative. You will not hear us use the word minority in our space because minority in a lot of instances mean less than, and we're changing those narratives. There are critical ecosystem gaps that we're actually targeting and making sure that we work to fill those. We provide wraparound support, and you heard that again in the hiring process. It's the same in the entrepreneurship process. Wraparound support, care, and love helps entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs of color have to go through with lots of trauma. For example, one of the entrepreneurs that we're working with now is scaling her business, but at the same time had a death in her family, so she has to take care of that. We make sure that we are there to support and then help with peer-to-peer relationship to help in developing that. Let's look at the next slide. So what sets us apart? When you think about it, we are a powerful combination of cohort leadership training and learning. When you sit in an immersive learning training, it actually shifts your mindset from day one. And the mindset of taking you out of working in your business to working from 20,000 feet outside of your business, so that you can see that when you need to add headcount to your company and your organization so you could do more. Mentorship. The mentorship, our mentors are many different leaders within our community. I mean, you know several of them, part of our board of directors. They actually ask the businesses the type of questions that no one else will ask them so that they can actually think, grow, and scale. Concierge care, I talked about loving care and support. One of the things that you look at with each company is to ensure that they get to the next level of success. We have companies who are in a space where they can scale and get to the next level, but because, again, I mentioned that FICO score, even though if they have a good one, can't get capital to actually move and grow. We help them by taking them to a banking relationship that gives them the opportunity to get that capital. We've actually included getting them into their places where they have investor conversations so that they could get investment in their companies. Continuous relationship. If you're in cohort 1, we've been around for almost 18 months. If you're a member of cohort 1, you're still part of our cohort and part of the next CLT family. So we give you access to situations where we may have a valuation of how companies get valuated. And so if we're sharing that with cohort 3, we'll share that with cohort 1 if we didn't have that available at that time. And then we give each company a $15,000 grant as full participants as they go through the program so that they can actually continue to grow and take the vantage point of the learning without missing a beat from a financial gap. Let's go to the next slide, please. Our impact. So we are excited about our impact because, let's go to the next slide. So we've given out over $315,000 in grants. Cohort 4, we actually started cohort 4 last week, March 31st. We gave them an orientation in February and then we kicked them off on March 31st. Cohort 3 is wrapping up April 7th, right? Wrapping up doesn't mean they finished. It means that they're wrapping up the immersive learning portion, but they've already been tied to their mentors where they're having mentorship. We also, out of those companies, 32 leaders. When we say 32 leaders, we have companies who are anywhere from 3 years old to 39 years in business. What we're trying to do is make sure that that company that's 39 years is around for another 39 years, and those businesses that are 3 years old are around for 39 plus, right? 310 businesses served. What that means is, as an ecosystem, we actually make sure that we give warm handoffs to each other. So with the Amped Up program, we make sure that we are connected and we give a warm handoff. If somebody doesn't fit the next CLT program, we will make sure that we give them a personal contact and then let the Amped Up crew know that we're passing them on to them. Same thing with Aspire, BoostPad, etc. So we are actually a full ecosystem working together. Next CLT is part of that ecosystem. Next slide, please. So how do we achieve that? I talked about the immersive learning, and it's 18 months of where companies really engage with us. Phase 1, learning and development, guided facilitation. We have some phenomenal facilitators who make people think, who make them grow and look at things differently. Plus, they're also good at bringing in the right mix of people to speak to our cohort. So for example, if you're going through our immersive learning program, when you get to the third, fourth week, we do assessments as we keep going through, and we ask the group, what do they need to get now that they truly need? And so we'll listen to that and bring in somebody specifically for that need. And so that's why we customize it. That also differentiates us in that space. Phase 2, growth and implementation, mentorship, mentee initiative. Phase 3, leadership peer-to-peer. And I talked about that assessment. We have monthly surveys administered after each learning session so that companies know where they are, know how they are growing, and then taking assessment with them. Next slide, please. So, Yard Doctor, here's some of the quick, statements coming out of Yard Doctor, who is a landscaping company. Since going through the process, bought an office building, gained a major contract just by talking through and having some dialogue with his mentor. Received access to $50,000 in capital after previously being denied. So he was in a position to scale and grow, but needed capital. And if he didn't get that capital, wouldn't have been able to scale and grow, particularly during the pandemic. Reclaim a new sense of identity, he said, because we made him think differently. Commit to growth and success. Took out our most important needs and helped us to accomplish those objectives. In this space as well, Yard Doctor is also looking at passing on his organization to the next generation of his family, and has his family, his daughter, actually learning and growing and scaling with him as we go. Next slide. Brandon, so gynecology. So she actually was working in her business, not really working and looking at the bigger picture. What she's been able to do just by sitting down and having some conversations with her mentor after coming through and getting organized and learning how to add talent. So we talk about jobs and really having relationships, right? She had a mindset change. Based on mentorship, she was able to go out and hire a nurse practitioner. Also hired a consulting firm to help her look at independent ways of working. She also renegotiated her contract insurance.
Excuse me, could I interrupt for 1 second, please?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I have a stop, and I'm just interested to know what the context is for this presentation. I mean, is this a grant application? Are we proposing to partner? It would be helpful to know why we're receiving this information.
That's a great question, Councilmember Driggs. So both Next CLT and Road to Hire, we are financial supporters and partners of these programs. So because the city's made an investment in both, we wanted to bring forward the accomplishments and the work that's being done.
So is it a grant? Is this part of our financial partners program?
I believe, I don't know that either of them are part of the financial partners program. I think some was stimulus money at one point, and then we've just got an ongoing contract, I know, with Next CLT. Sorry, I'm not exactly sure how Road to Hire is set up. Emily or somebody else may be able to say that better. But I know for us, we just have a contract, a 3-year contract with Next CLT to do this program.
So it'd just be helpful to have some context here, because this is a bit like an infomercial. I appreciate, but I don't know how to use that. Do you know how much money we're investing or what we have put in?
So again, I can speak to Next CLT, $250 a year, is that right?
Yeah,
$250 a year.
$250,000. Yeah.
And we are not the only financial supporter of Next CLT either. It's just our commitment to see the organization and get it up and moving.
Yeah,
All right, thank you. So is there any action that is needed, or is this just informational for us now?
It is informational.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, I apologize, but I do have to get off. And I'm sorry to miss whatever remains of the presentation, but I appreciate what I've seen so far.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Councilmember Graham, I apologize, this is Walton. I also have to jump,
Okay.
but I do appreciate the information. I've been a fan of this program for a while, so I'm glad to see there's been good successes and look forward to continue supporting.
Thank you, Ms. Wallington. Mr. Driggs. All right, continue.
Okay. Next slide, we'll be wrapping up after a couple slides. Yeah. Rensco, another company within our cohorts that is actually scaling and growing, has gotten several new contracts, and this is just some of his designs that we wanted to share as part of the quality of work. So one of the things that we actually want to make sure people are aware of in this space is we are actually working with untapped, talented Black, Indigenous people of color. And so we are making sure that they get access to the opportunities. Next slide, please. Miles Enterprise Solutions just received $200,000 in investment to drive business growth from an impact investor. Increase in business clients, 3 enterprise governments, has hired 1 full-time person and 2 part-time professional, and revenues since coming through the program has increased by 74% a year ago. And next slide. Thank you very much.
Eric, Mr. Lewis, I want to thank you for your presentation and all the work you've done. I think it's really important what you're doing in the community and the focus group that you're working with. Again, it goes back to the affordability of the city, right? And not only do we have to ensure that those who are looking for job opportunities can get it, but those who have the ability to hire people and small businesses and people of color who own businesses collectively probably employ more people than all the major banks in the city, small businesses in general. And so the focus that you have, the work that we've done, and the investment that we're making, I think is spot on. So I just want to thank you for the presentation and the work you've done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The city, small businesses are the lifeblood of the city, and we are continuing to grow and make sure we nurture and create that care package and that wraparound services for those businesses. Thank you.
We appreciate you.
Thanks.
Holly?
So actually, I'll turn it over to Emily for Road to Hire.
Okay. Emily, welcome.
Thanks, Holly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be super brief, but want to introduce my close colleague, Casey Grantham. She's the CEO of Road to Hire and just a brilliant thought leader in this space in the community. So the city has been a partner in workforce development and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives with Road to Hire for several years. Christina mentioned Casey was a member of our Hire Steering Committee. Road to Hire also leans in heavily for our mayor's youth employment program. And last year, the city council made a commitment of approximately $900,000 to Road to Hire's Pathways program as a way to strengthen our commitment to workforce development in the community. So Casey's going to give you a high-level overview of Road to Hire and specifically talk about the impacts of this Pathways program and what she is hoping to accomplish with some additional funding in this next year's budget cycle. So Casey, welcome, and I apologize not being able to reach you there in person.
No worries. Thank you, Emily, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you all, and it was great to hear your presentation too. That's really exciting, the work that Next Charlotte is doing. So, Road to Hire. Our focus is really interrupting cycles of intergenerational poverty in Charlotte by creating on-ramps to high-earning, high-growth careers for young adults who wouldn't otherwise have those opportunities. And we're really doing that in 2 ways. One is by investing in young adults, primarily in our Title I high schools, in addition to that Philip O'Berry, and helping support them on 3 potential paths. One is to a 4-year college, to a 2-year or vocational experience, or to a paid apprenticeship. And we are working with those young people for multiple years, so from really like 11th grade to and through a post-secondary experience and into their first couple of years in a career path STEM field. And Chair Graham, you had talked about the relationship aspect, and that's what we feel like is really important, is developing trust and relationship with young people so that they will be open to opportunities when they come forward. And we've just seen over time that that's really important. So that's the first thing, is that investment in young people. The second piece is the relationship with employers. So, I'm sorry, should have turned that on. Thank you. Making sure that employers are almost pre-committed to internships, full-time jobs, and in going up funnel to invest in young adults who, like I said, are underrepresented in particularly STEM and business fields in their company. So we're sort of that platform between the young adults, the emerging professionals, and that employment piece. So if you want to go to the next slide, I just want to talk through, can you go through a couple, sorry, go one more, Wendy, if you don't mind, and one more. You guys have these in your deck, so you can look in more detail if you want, but I just want to focus in on a couple of specific slides. And this is what that Pathways model looks like. So we meet student, and where the city of Charlotte in particular has invested for the 2021-22 school year. So we meet those students in their spring of their junior year when they're applying to the program. That summer before their senior year of high school, we are working with, and we're giving paid experiences to those students before their senior year of high school. And what we're doing is making sure that they are prepared to apply for college, to apply for financial aid, that they have exposure to professionals in the STEM careers that they may want to pursue, and that they have access to representatives from universities to be coming in to them and talking about their experiences. So when students get into the next step, which is we are actually teaching a class in the 5 Title I high schools plus Philippa Berry that they get credit for during their senior year. They have to apply for post-secondary experiences. They got to complete their FAFSA. But then the bigger thing in that experience is they learn HTML, they learn CSS, they learn Excel, basic tech and business acumen that they're getting credit for in high school, as well as the soft skills we just talked about with Hire Charlotte. Public speaking, how to write an email, a professional email, how to respond in a timely manner to requests that you're getting, all of that kind of stuff we're teaching in their senior year of high school. Students who do well in that class, and we're intending to be as inclusive as possible. We have students with 2.5 GPA and 4.5 GPA. We are trying to be inclusive for young adults to make sure we're supporting students who otherwise wouldn't have figured it out, if that makes sense. And so if they get a B in that class, we commit to make sure they can either graduate college debt-free or that they can get access to a paid STEM apprenticeship. So right now that means software development or pre-nursing with Atrium. The second place where the city is really investing is that summer after, which we know can be a melt period, that summer after high school, but before the post-secondary experience. And again, a paid experience where students are learning how to independently navigate that next phase of their lives, right? And so that can be anything from time management in college to making sure you're signing up for the right classes to study skills to just really using the resources that you're going to have available to you and making sure young adults are aware of what those opportunities are. After that, they enroll in college, and during that second summer, actually, they meet their student career coach who is going to be with them for that entire college or post-secondary, if it's an apprenticeship, that entire experience. And for up to 4 years, they meet that person, and they are with that person, meeting them at least monthly, if not more, during their college experience. And then we are making sure they have summer experiences in corporate spaces after freshman year, after sophomore year, after junior year. What we want to make sure is that young adult, and by the way, 96% of the students we're working with are students of color, 55% are women, are young women, and we want to make sure that those students are not going back while they're in college, are not going back and doing the job they had in high school, but they're actually in a Bank of America or in an Atrium Health or in the spaces where they can begin to feel like they belong and are accustomed to, so that when they are ready for that full-time job or that really, like I call it the legit pre-senior year internship, that they really thrive in that space. And then all the way to and through college graduation or apprenticeship completion and into the first 2 years on the job, we're staying with them to make sure that they, again, have the resources they need to thrive in those spaces. Next slide. So this is one example. It's the same steps. So I won't walk through all of them, but this is Chisholm. He graduated from Julius Chambers in 2021 and went through all of those steps. Part of that was applying to UNCC. He applied to 4 other colleges too, but applied to UNCC, and he is now going to graduate debt-free he's a freshman, but he's going to graduate debt-free from UNCC with a combination of his federal and state aid, which we made sure he got because he completed his FAFSA, Road to Hire funding, and then UNCC matched our funding. So it is really, we want to make sure students can graduate debt-free. That's really important to us. So he's a 3.56 GPA. I just checked on it at UNCC. He meets regularly with his coach, and he is going to have an experience at Truist this summer. And And, like I said, if all continues to go well, graduate debt-free. So that's Chisholm, and there's hundreds more examples, but if you can move to the next one. Actually, if you can move one more, Wendy, thank you. I'll come back to that one. But I want to share results to date. So that first class is the class that Chisholm is in. That was the class of 2021. So we have 125 students in post-secondary, 119 are in college, and 6 are in paid apprenticeships. We have really close partnerships with actually 9 colleges and universities in North Carolina, of course, the 3 big ones in Charlotte. We are seeing really strong retention rates first semester and are projecting a 90% first-year persistence rate, which would be really high relative to other students from those schools. Now, the second class of 2022, the ones who are currently seniors in high school, this is where the City of Charlotte's first tranche of support had come in. We have 323 active students and are estimating that 240 of those will continue with Road to Hire to a post-secondary experience. The rest most will still graduate from high school, but the 240 we expect will have earned that post-secondary debt-free college or paid apprenticeship through Road to Hire. The next 2 stats are really important. 97% of our students are completing FAFSA. 58% is the state average. We're leaving money on the table for college, and we are making sure by literally giving them a grade, honestly, to complete FAFSA. As Councilman Driggs kind of said, they're discouraged. You might have to pull them kicking and screaming. I'm paraphrasing, but a little bit, some of that has to happen in high school, but we are staying with them to make sure they do that, and then almost 1,300 college applications among those 323 students. They're learning key tech skills, and they have tons of guests. Every week, they've got a guest speaker coming in from a different company or university talking to them about opportunities. If you go to the next one. These are our partners, and we don't have to go through all of these. I just share it to say we're not trying to do this alone. The City of Charlotte is a really important partner, but so are all of these companies and universities who are committed both funding-wise and social capital-wise to this program. If you can go back 2 slides, apologies, Wendy, I know I'm really messing with the, yes, one more. This is the funding. So as Emily mentioned, almost $900,000 in funding for this first cohort. And I just want to emphasize here that it's much higher leverage than just, the $900,000 is impacting those 323 students directly. The fact that the City of Charlotte is a part of this has really helped us go out and leverage this funding as a catalyst for more university partnerships, additional employer partnerships, Mecklenburg County. I won't go through all of these, but it's been incredibly valuable to be able to say that the City of Charlotte is a partner. So I just want to thank you all for that, but also just let you know that the funding goes well beyond, or the impact goes well beyond just the dollars on this screen. And then if you can move forward, I guess 3 slides. Yeah, one more. This is what's next for those students. We talked about it. So what do we want? You asked about Hire Charlotte, what we want. If you go to the next slide, Wendy, we are expecting to start 405 students this summer. We are in the kind of outreach and recruiting process this week. It literally, the applications are due. And so what we're proposing, next slide, please, is 933,000, I think. Yeah, that is what the kind of equivalent to the 898 this year would be 933 because we're adding a few more students. So I will stop there and answer questions if people have them, but I feel like this is, I guess, lucky to be on the back of some of those discussions we had about Hire Charlotte, because exactly what we talked about, that's what we were attempting to do in creating a coalition of folks to support that work.
Well, thank you for the presentation. All good information, all very good programmatic investment that the city is doing in both programs. Greg, do you have any questions?
No, I mean, it's a good presentation. Yes, encouraging.
And this will be in our budget deliberations as we move forward.
We'll check and see where that is, but I would imagine, yeah, there's some kind of discussion if that was something y'all funded last year. So we'll check into it for sure.
I know we got Wednesday. We're going over all our partners, so I would imagine it would fall into that.
Yeah, we'll get back to you.
Okay. Well, we appreciate the work that you're doing. Obviously, the facts speak for themselves in both programs, and so we really appreciate both organizations partnering with the City of Charlotte and delivering the impact, and that's the bottom line, right? What have you done? And so there's a return on the investment of dollars that the city's putting into it. So I want to thank you very much. Okay?
I think we're good. So thank you for presenting today.
Yeah, just one comment. I know we talked about May's meeting, about the international cabinet.
Yes.
Just want to make sure that we're still on target for that.
Yes.
Okay, so we're, okay.
We're on it. We're all on the same
All
page.
right, all right. So I'm pretty sure you guys will be hearing something from the city shortly. And then also, I would like to kind of get some information about what we're doing internationally from an economic development perspective, right? So we can have a robust conversation, as well as where the alliance is in terms of what they are and what they aren't doing as we move forward. So, and then I'll talk with Tracy in terms of how we gotta make sure that it's a meaningful conversation.
Sounds great.
Okay, and it's just for information only. Okay, all right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Greg, thanks for hanging in there with us. I know it's a long meeting, but we had an agenda item that we carried over from our last meeting, and so we'll try our best to be mindful of the timing, but the work has to be done.
Right, okay, doke.
All right, thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.